As I was mentioning, we're going to kind of wrap things up with our discussion through Matthew's gospel, Matthew's story of the life of Jesus Christ. And to do that, I want to just begin by giving you a brief kind of recap of what Matthew's been focused on. First of all, his overall picture is presenting Jesus as this king, this coming king that a family, Abraham's family, that grew into a nation called Israel, an ancient nation, still around today, the people group, but an ancient nation back at the time of Jesus. They were waiting on this promised figure. And there were different facets, kind of a mosaic or a portrait of this figure. And Matthew points out different aspects. One, this figure was supposed to be a child who would be born, but a child who would be called God with us, a different kind of child. This figure was supposed to be the ideal type of human who would model what the life God created humanity for in the first place was really supposed to look like. He was supposed to be a new Moses figure, a new leader who would redefine God's instructions and help people actually write them on their heart, make them a part of their desires. He was also supposed to be a suffering servant who would give his life to cover the wrongdoings of humanity and make a way for people to come near to God again. These are all different aspects of this long-awaited king that Israel was looking for. A king who would provide healing and restoration to people's lives, and who would expand beyond just Israel to invite all the nations of the world to come and experience God's kingdom as a reality then, but also an eternal future hope that everyone could look forward to. And Matthew portrays Jesus in all of these different aspects. And so as we wrap things up, keep that in mind. Matthew's writing to convince you and I and the readers at this time certainly that Jesus was that figure, that long-awaited king who could promise all of these things to humanity. He was convinced, but he's trying to show us the same story. And so that's kind of the mindset that we need to approach these last few verses in. So we're going to be in Matthew 28, the very end of this book, verses 16 through 20. And we'll work through that kind of quickly to cap things off this morning. But what happened just before this? On Easter Sunday, 2 weeks ago, we talked about Jesus' resurrection. And there were some women who came the morning that Jesus rose from the dead to the tomb. They were going to put some more spices on his body. And when they came there, they found that the grave was empty. They encountered someone that they believed to be an angel, an angelic being there, who told them that Jesus was risen, to go tell Jesus' disciples to go meet him on a mountain up in Galilee, where they used to follow Jesus and interact from day to day for 2 or 3 years. And so they delivered that message, and this picks up when they're on the way to that mountain and they actually encounter Jesus. That's how Matthew ends the story. It starts this way. It says, the 11 disciples traveled to Galilee, up by the Sea of Galilee in northern Israel, where they were all from, most of them, to the mountain where Jesus had directed them. And most likely the word directed, it's got some different nuances in the language, in the Greek language it was originally written in. Kind of has this idea that it might have been the place where Jesus appointed them or chose them in the first place, which is the same mountain where Jesus delivered what's called the Sermon on the Mount, or the body of teaching that you find earlier in Matthew in chapters 5, 6, and 7. So maybe this was kind of this very formational point that they were returning to. Whenever you see mountains in the Bible, it starts off that way. The Garden of Eden in the first page of the Bible, it's pictured as being on top of a mountain with a river flowing down out of it into this land that watered everything. And so mountains are supposed to connect our mind with a place where people meet with God, and a place where Moses met with God on the mountain. So when you see these people, these followers of Jesus, meeting with Jesus on a mountain, it's supposed to take you back. It's an image. It's Jesus creating this little Eden moment by bringing them to himself on a mountain. And in the same way that God had these great plans and great ideas for humanity, and he wanted to send them out from this garden to just infect the world with his goodness, didn't work out that way. Jesus has the same kind of thing, the same kind of mission in mind for his followers. And that's what he's about to try to send them out to do as well. So there's some connections here with him being high on the mountain. It says in verse 17, when they saw him, this risen, resurrected Jesus in physical form, they worshiped. So as 11, they were worshiping him, but it says some doubted. So the idea is that there's probably a much larger crowd present here than just his 11 followers. There are other places where the Apostle Paul mentions in 1 Corinthians 15, he talks about over 500 people claiming to have seen this resurrected Jesus. And so chances are there's more people than just 11 that are encountering him and his teaching and his final teachings here on this mountain. And so probably a larger group. And it's interesting because even seeing someone who a lot of people claim was the risen Jesus, there were still people who had doubts. And that's the same kind of thing, I think, the reality that Matthew wants us to realize we're going to encounter today. You can express your faith in this Jesus and tell them what you believe about this figure. But some people will still have doubts. And there isn't always an ability to convince people. It's something that God kind of brings about, is that conviction and that faith. And so there's going to be different responses to Jesus as you try to depict him to the people that are in your own world. And Matthew just wants us to be aware of that. It's been the same reaction that Jesus has had all along. In verse 18, it says, Jesus came near and he said to them, all authority has been given to me in heaven and here on the earth. And so this is an important phrase because, again, Matthew has been claiming Jesus is this king, this long-awaited king that Israel's been waiting for, who's more than a king, who's God in flesh, who's going to eventually create a kingdom and make this available to the nations. But it's not just a temporary one or an earthly one. It's one that's going to last forever, which implies that people are going to last forever and outlast their lives just here on earth and even encounter resurrection themselves. And so this is right in line with what we should expect. He says, I have authority in heaven and on earth now. I'm king of heaven and king of the earth now, is what Jesus is saying. He's received the right to rule over heaven and earth. And by what he accomplished on the cross, his death for the sins of humanity, he kind of retook that from death, that right to rule at that point. And so the question is, what's he going to do with that? And if you're one of those people sitting on a hillside listening to Jesus, I would think the wheels in your head are just starting to spin. What's going to happen? The King of heaven and earth is here now. And so what's going to happen? Is he going to overthrow opposing nations and opponents? Is he going to create this new world with justice now where people are treated right? Is he going to start healing people right and left and take away the calamities that people deal with and the suffering? What's he going to do? And so everybody's just waiting to figure out what's going to happen next. And what he says is surprising, because what he ends up doing in the next few verses is appointing some assistants. Instead of him going throughout the world and declaring himself as king, he's actually going to return to heaven for a while. And he's going to turn things over to his human representatives here on earth, his followers. And they're going to go around and spread this message that Jesus is the king of heaven and earth. And people are going to respond in different ways to that message. But instead of him working directly, his method is going to be sending his followers out into the world. And so that's a very different approach that people were not expecting. But it's kind of an amazing one. I want to show you some pictures here on the screen. How many of you would like to be in this location right now? One or two of you, why? Why would you like to be there? Why? It doesn't that look great? Yeah. I'd love to experience relaxation. And it looks like these folks are, right? Why else would you like to be there? Somebody else. Beautiful. It's beautiful. Yeah. Scenic beauty. Look at those little islands off in the distance in the ocean. It's paradise, right? How about here? What's the next one? How many of you would like to be in Venice right now? Why? Why would you like to be in Venice?
Floating down the canal.
Yeah, floating down the canals on the gondolas. What else?
New adventure.
A new adventure, right? Never been there before. New culture, new places. Yeah. New food, yeah. Italy's known for their food, right? So if you're foodie, that's the place to go. What about this one? How many of you would like to go here? Big city. Any of you? Some people are like, see, that's tricky because we're in a more like rural location. We're a little distance from the bigger cities here. But I was talking to somebody last week and they're like, you know what? I was made for the cities. And this is a little adjustment, getting used to the hiking and all the outdoor stuff around here. And so for some people, it's the excitement, again, the culture and the cuisine and the variety of people that you experience in the city and the opportunities for constant activities 24/7, night and day. Some people like that. What about this one here? Maybe this is going to take you a little more remote locations to the fjords of Norway, maybe. And so maybe you want to experience, again, more remote locations or get away to mountainous areas, things like that. As long as you don't have to shovel the snow. That's right. I forget where we're at, right? People move here for a reason. So when you look at travel brochures, they are going to not necessarily just use words to describe these opportunities. They're going to show you pictures. And these images are an invitation for you. They're just calling out to you, come here and experience me. And Jesus' method was very much the same thing. Only instead of using photographs, he's using human images of himself to call people into this different way of life, to experience a totally different way of life that he kind of set the model for while he was here. And he's going to empower his followers through what he calls the Holy Spirit of God. And you have to read on in the story of the Bible, past Matthew's account of Jesus' life, into really what Luke writes in a book called Acts in the New Testament, kind of the history of the early church, to see how this happens and what brings it about. But he's going to empower his followers to become the types of images of God that they were created to be on the first couple pages of the Bible. It says God created humanity in his own image. What's that mean? People that were going to partner with him to bring about the kind of life that he envisioned here on earth. And then we took it our own direction. We did our selfish things and made it what we wanted to, and it didn't always match God's ideal and what he envisioned. But Jesus is kind of resetting things and giving a whole new opportunity, inviting people into a totally different way of life. And that's what he closes out with in the last couple of verses, is Jesus' ambition, his vision, you might say, for what he wants here and now to become. And certainly in the Bible, you can make the argument that he has plans for the future and for eternity, and I think he does. But for here and now, he wants to work through his human followers and representatives to show people what kind of life is possible and invite people into that by others seeing the lives of those who follow him. So in verse 19, he says, "Go therefore." And a better way to say this in modern English and reflect the tenses of the grammar that was used when it was originally written probably would be something like, go wherever life takes you. Because there's this element of going that we can't see. It doesn't come through in English, but it's an idea that part of going, your life is kind of out of your control, and there are other elements and forces pushing you in different directions. Sometimes circumstances, they shut doors, right? Or people open up opportunities. God uses people to lead you, or he kind of convicts you or prompts you to do certain things, or circumstances shut off opportunities and other doors open. So it's always this kind of fluid thing. And so the idea is wherever life takes you, Jesus is saying, here's what I want your life to be about if you're a follower of me, if you consider yourself a follower of me. And the next phrase he says, make disciples of all nations. And I think this has been understood in a lot of different ways. But really to understand what Jesus means by making disciples or literally discipling people, you have to go back to the Jewish concept of what a disciple was at Jesus' time. And his 11 followers, they were called disciples for a reason. And there were more people than just that who were following Jesus. But the idea is, in the first century, a disciple is somebody who's invited into someone's life. Normally a teacher, somebody with more experience, like Jesus had disciples and he was the more experienced teacher, and that's set up. And so he invited people into his life for several years oftentimes. And the whole idea was they were going to learn his entire way of life by his example. They were going to learn about his prayers by seeing him pray. They were going to see him in action and how he interacted with people and the priorities and what he did with his time. And they were going to hear his conversations and what he talked about because they had this ongoing relationship and friendship. And they were going to see him just sit in silence at different times or even grieve. They were going to see him love people. They were going to see his humility and how that played out, his hospitality and the types of people he socialized with and how he socialized with people. They were going to see how he worked, his work ethic, his religious devotion, how he was involved with his community, how he ate, all these things. They were going to see his life, just a showcase of his life, because they were going to experience life with him. And so when Jesus talks to his followers and says, I want you to take on disciples, he's saying, I want you to invite people into your life. And I want them, in essence, to be able to experience Jesus' way of life through the way that you live your life. So his followers, whether it was in the first century or now today, 2,000 years later, right, 20 centuries almost later, the idea is that our purpose still is to invite people. Not just the people that are similar to us, but people from different cultures. And even in a place that's not maybe as diverse as a huge city like Southwest Utah, there are still people, a diversity of people here with different opinions and different backgrounds and different cultures. And so it's not just selectivity, it's anyone is a part of this, is welcome into this. But we invite people into our lives so they can experience Jesus' way of life, and so they can be loved like Jesus would love them through us, right? That's what it means to take on disciples. And so it's not just verbalizing some message. It's much more life on life, which is part of the things that we have to be careful about as a church. Because a lot of times churches, the kind of idea is you do as much stuff here at a church building as possible. You do as much as you can to keep busy, and if you want to bring people and introduce them to Jesus, what you do is you invite them to come to the building where they can hear somebody talk. But Jesus' whole ambition is slightly different. We want to make sure that we create enough space for you all to have friendships with whomever God puts in your life. People from your neighborhood, people from your jobs, people that you just enjoy similar things with. You don't want your life just to be with the people in this room, because you're trying to invite people into your life so they can see how you live and how you love, and you're trying to imitate Jesus at the same time, and so am I. And so that's the bigger picture of what this is about. And maybe conversations will come up and people will ask questions. And maybe at some point, somebody in your life will say, I would like to go to church with you, or I'd like for you to tell me more about Jesus, or, you read the Bible, tell me more about that. And so they're at a point where they're getting more introduced to Jesus, and they want that way of life for themselves. Not your job to force it or convince people, but just to model it. And then if people get to that point, Jesus has these last couple of phrases, because as people decide, I want to follow Jesus myself, there's a couple of things that help people step into that faith and grow in their faith, and that's where Jesus closes things out. He says, baptizing them into the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And so kind of through baptism, it's a way of people reenacting Jesus' death and resurrection, because they come to the point of believing, I do believe Jesus was this promised king. I do believe that he died for the wrongdoings that we have done to bring us near to God. I do believe that he rose again, that he's still alive in this life and this kingdom and this power that he offers to us. It's a reality, and Jesus will one day raise us. And so they're starting to believe Jesus' teachings to the point where they're like, this is me. This is my faith. And so they do this ritual, baptism, to basically identify as people who also accept Jesus' death, which is why people are lowered into the water, and his resurrection, which is one of the main reasons people are raised out of the water, and to show people, this is what I believe brings me into a relationship with God. And this is the basis for why I want to live life now. It makes this way of life possible. And so people choose to do that. It doesn't mean that it gives them faith. It just means that that's one way that they identify as a follower of Jesus. And also Jesus says through teaching. He says teaching them to observe or pay attention to everything I've commanded you, the direction that I've aimed you toward. And so that's why teaching oftentimes gets incorporated in gatherings of Jesus followers, because we're continually trying to point ourselves as a community toward Jesus' instructions. Because I think, as Christine mentioned before, this song, the special music number that they did, there's a lot of things that influence us and pull us to live life in different ways. Some of it's just the culture, the ways that we're raised, whatever is most comfortable or most familiar to us. Sometimes it's pressure and the pressure people put on us, or reputations. And so lots of things are trying to direct us and steer us in life. And so Jesus' teachings kind of bring us back to a solid foundation. It's a good reminder. And so we're coming back to those things constantly as a community of Jesus followers, just to make sure we're kind of still pointed in the right direction. And so those are two things that help people step into faith, express their faith, continue to grow in their faith as they follow Jesus, and learn to live, again, like he lives. Because as people grow in their faith, the whole goal is you're becoming more like Jesus and trying to live like he lived, and then you invite other people into your life. and they see how Jesus affects your life. And that's something that becomes interesting and exciting, and like a travel brochure, some people want to actually go and experience it. Not everybody does. Some of you might have seen those pictures that I showed a couple minutes ago and said, you know what? I'm perfectly happy where I'm at. Just keep me at my home, keep my feet planted on the ground. Don't need to see any of those places. But for other people, they think, I'd like a taste of that. And it's the same way with people. Sometimes your life will be the thing that invites people into a deeper experience with God because they want a taste of that for themselves. The very last thing Jesus says here is, and remember, I'm with you all always. It's literally, it's every day is what he says, to the end of the age. And that phrase invites some questions. One of them is like, why did Jesus say, remember, I'm with you? Because obviously he's been with them for years, right, at this point. And that's kind of a foreshadow. He's going to be away for a while. And so he wants them to remember, even when I'm away, I'm still with you. He says, I am with you. And a lot of times when the writers of these gospels, these biographies of Jesus' life, they use that phrase, I am. It's a small little tongue-in-cheek way of referring back to the name of God throughout the Bible. He calls himself the I am. That's how he identifies, how he reveals his name to people. And so maybe this is just another indicator here by Matthew that he believes and he thinks that we should be convinced that Jesus is God, who is capable of always being with us even when he's not with us, maybe is how Matthew might put that, to the end of the age. And Jesus has talked about the end of the age in Matthew, and when he says that, he's basically talking about a time period after which he'll come back. And so what he's telling his followers is, I'm going to go away for a while. Eventually I'm coming back. But remember, I'm with you every day. Even though you can't see me, I'm more than just human. I'm with you. And so as you try to live the life that I've taught you, remember, I'm with you. I'm by your side. I'm drawing people into that. And Jesus is inviting people into this kingdom. And if you want to go to the next slide, we'll kind of finish off here. That's been the topic of Matthew. It's this kingdom that Jesus and Matthew has been inviting people, and his followers for centuries ever since have been inviting people into, to recognize Jesus as king and then to create this new reality. It's not like we're not still living in our world, but we're kind of living a parallel life where we're following a little bit different direction and leader and model, Jesus. And so we're living life in this very kind of different, unique way as we move through life at the same time. It redefines our reality and welcomes people into a little taste of heaven, maybe here on earth, but then there's also a future hope of Jesus' return and of our own resurrection and of a future and an eternity with God. And so the New Testament continues to move on toward that and give more information, but that's where Matthew wraps things up with Jesus' ambition as king, not to rule the world yet, but to send his representatives out and to invite people into this new way of living through us. So a neat challenge and a neat way to end a book, because that's our mission in essence in life, as if we are followers of Jesus.